So today we are honored to host Gene Kansas, who is a distinguished author, historic preservationist, and community advocate, as he discusses his book, Civil Sites, with us. Gene Kansas has dedicated his career to preserving and reimagining historic spaces, ensuring that the past remains a part of our present and our future. As the founder of Gene Kansas Commercial Real Estate, he has led numerous preservation and adaptive reuse projects, giving new life to Atlanta's architectural history. He's also the visionary behind Constellations, a cultural workspace in Sweet Auburn that's designed to foster civic and social change. As an award-winning writer, Gene has been featured in the AJC, the Atlanta Magazine, and numerous other publications. He's also known for his thought-provoking work as the creator and host of Sidewalk Radio, which we did get to talk about a little bit, and I'm excited to be able to share some of those stories as well. So everyone, please help me in welcoming Gene Kansas to the Georgia Archives. So we're just going to get started with this question. Sweet Auburn is such an iconic neighborhood. How many of you are familiar with Atlanta's Sweet Auburn neighborhood? Good majority. Civil Sites shines a light on its history and its importance. What inspired you to take on this project? And was there a particular moment or a story that really stood out to you and made you think, I really need to write this book?
Yeah, sure. So just to give a very brief history before we dive deeper into history about Sweet Auburn. Sweet Auburn is in downtown Atlanta. It's the birthplace of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement. It is critically important, and it, in many ways, is crumbling. It was designated a historic landmark district in 1976, and since then, nearly 47% of its buildings have been lost. And that is unacceptable. When we don't have this historic fabric, it's really hard to be able to share vitally important lessons, and in this case from the civil rights movement, with generations into the future, because it doesn't give us the same ability to spark a conversation. Of course, we can have it in the form of presentation in a book, but what we're missing is the ability to walk within and through history. And so as a preservationist, I'm deeply committed to helping share the story, because stories connect us. And when we're connected meaningfully, that's usually motivating in some form or fashion. And when we're motivated, we take action, and action can lead to change. So by being here today, thank you. We're all participating in this. This is a great question to start with, because archives can be heirlooms. And it's not, in this case, we're all fortunate that the Georgia Archives exist, and that we have access to research and to programming. We also have our own personal archives that we're keeping, whether we know it or not, and we all have family heirlooms. So if I think back really to answer the question about what inspired me to take on this project, I think back on being a kid in New Orleans, growing up in a city rich with history and culture, and fried shrimp, and oak trees. Yes, and the gumbo that is New Orleans. In addition to the food, just the mix of people coming together and the soul of it all. And having parents that really exposed us to so much, me and my sister. And on my 7th birthday, my mom took me and my younger sister to a friend's house who was a musician. And they had a recording studio in the house. And what began as something that I thought was just fun, right? Playing around, telling jokes, reciting poetry, playing on instruments, became a 40-minute family heirloom and a personal treasure in the form of an oral history. And like 20 minutes into this, a Grammy Award-winning musician named Art Neville came into the room. And even as a 7-year-old, I knew that that was important. Like, if if you were living in New Orleans at that time and were at all aware, like you knew who the Neville brothers were. And I didn't think about it in terms of oral history. I didn't think about it in terms of preservation, although that's exactly what it was. I knew though that it was an important moment and I knew it was being recorded. And that's when that's my first memory of saying, this is something that I love. I love the feeling of it. And so when I moved to Atlanta 29 years ago, and to make a long story short, I got lost in Sweet Auburn because, as y'all remember, there was no GPS back then. And I said to myself, this is special. This is a place that has an incredible energy. I could feel that I was present in an era, and I could also see that it was fairly vacant. And I knew something that happened there, on both counts, but I didn't know what. And as someone who loves history and as a writer, I started to investigate that. And that's how I got involved. Now, years later, doing actual, the historic rehabilitation or historic preservation of buildings and starting to get to know the stories of those buildings, including, Robin, if we can go to the first page, I guess it's 70. Yes. Going to the Atlanta Daily World building, which is right here at 145 Auburn. This building is a historic site in journalism. It is, its period of significance was really in the 1960s when the Daily World newspaper, the oldest Black daily newspaper in the country, was operating during the civil rights movement and was a megaphone for labor movement. Jump way forward to 2008 when a tornado rips through downtown Atlanta. It hits this building, ripped the roof off the building. It rained in there for the next 4 months because the insurance company wouldn't, frankly, do its right, and there could not be a replacement roof put on. And that caused really severe damage. It forced the Daily World newspaper, of course, to move out. And then for the next 4 years, it sat lingering. And when I started paying attention to it was when a developer applied for a demolition permit. The Scott family had to sell the building. A developer wanted to tear it down under the pretense that it had to be torn down because nothing, could be done about it. And the community of Sweet Auburn, 1,100 people came together to sign a petition to deny the demolition of this building. And I was like, wow, this community has a will and they care. And this is now really newsworthy. So, it was accessible. And I thought, that's important. Being in real estate and doing work in Sweet Auburn, I eventually met Alexa Scott, whose grandfather started the paper. And she wanted to bring the Daily World back to Auburn Avenue. They had actually moved closer to the airport, really, I think for distribution purposes, but also just to have a home with a roof on it, literally. And she wanted to be back in Auburn, and she came to see a space that we were working on, but I kept wanting to see her family's building. And when I walked in, I saw broken glass, rotting wood, buckling joists. I saw a building that had been hit by a tornado, but I also could feel the positive energy. I could see and feel the importance. And that's when I started to really dive into the history of that building. Was fortunate to lead a historic preservation of it. And in 2014, completed it. March of 2015, had the grand reopening. And that really got me going. That eventually led to writing this book.
That's phenomenal.
Short enough?
Yeah, long story short. So I think, first of all, I love that you call that experience when you were younger a family heirloom. I don't think we think of it a lot that way. Those experiences we have when we're younger that connect us to those stories. I love that you refer to it as a family heirloom. So I'm going to steal that from now on. So understanding this inspiration behind civil sites really gives us good insight to the heart of the book. So let's talk about how you brought Sweet Auburn's history to life. Researching a neighborhood as historically significant as Sweet Auburn must have been both exciting and probably a little terrifying. How did you go about uncovering the stories and selecting the ones you wanted to feature? And were there any discoveries that surprised you along the way?
Well, yeah, I mean, it took a lot of research to only write 234 pages. Thousands and thousands of pages of reading, a lot from archives. Thank archives. And what I discovered very quickly in my research is that there is a hidden history, meaning an exclusionary history. And I discovered and understood that women, and in particular, Black women, have been hidden from history. And it was that moment in time when I decided to shift the focus of the book to not just be about the remarkable accomplishments of Black women history, but really to try to focus on and shine a light on all of the unknown, unsung, and underrepresented heroes and heroines of the movement. And that became fascinating because, look, Martin Luther King Jr. was an incredible leader who changed the world. We all know you don't do that in a vacuum. You don't do that on your own. And so and to just learn about individuals really is a human connection. And so that's when I really started getting into it. Rosalind Pope, maybe one of my favorite leaders in the civil rights movement. Has anyone ever heard of Rosalind Pope in this room? It's not common that someone would, because she had been hidden in history. However, Rosalind Pope in 1944 was a child in District 5, which was Atlanta's first Black Girl Scout troop, in this building on the second floor. This was they were founded in 1943. In their inaugural year, they came in second in the entire city in cookie sales. Okay. Like, they were an ambitious, incredible group of people and leaders to become leaders. Rosalind Pope was a kid. When she was a senior at Spelman, she became the principal author for a civil rights manifesto called An Appeal for Human Rights. And that basically called for equality in every facet of life and in every way. And that manifesto, which was published in the Atlanta Daily World newspaper and later reprinted in the New York Times, sparked the Atlanta student movement. That helped spark the national student movement. That gave rise and credence to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And that led to success in the civil rights movement. And no one knows who she was. Another fellow scout was Madeline Nix, who was part of the Atlanta Nine, who integrated the school system. This is Georgia history. This is United States history, and it's world history. And thank you for asking that important question, because it's the unknown that really surprised me, but also really inspired me.
Say Madeline Nix is a frequent visitor to the archives. I think she's part of GGS and all those other organizations that we work with, and she's a phenomenal person. I think we even have a video from when she gave a talk here a few years ago about that experience too. So if you get the chance, check that out. I highly recommend it. But so you mentioned a couple of times how big a role archives play.
I'm sorry, would you mind doing a quick
Yeah.
favor for me? Can you go to page 57?
Yeah.
It's just like kind of adding on to your question, and also this thing about hidden in history.
Mhm.
So this is a mural that's on a wall in Sweet Auburn. It's called the Gold Dust Twins. And this was also hidden in history, but in a very different way. A few minutes ago, I talked about this tornado that came through, and it carved a 6-mile path of destruction, by the way. $250 million in damage, loss of life, tragic. One of the buildings that it knocked down revealed what's known as a ghost sign. This was on the exterior wall of a building, and then another building was built like abutting it. So you couldn't see this until a tornado came around and revealed it. And this is Goldie and Dusty for gold dust washing powder. That also is an extremely racist advertisement. And I think that this is another hidden in history moment. And I wanted to make sure it was in the book because while racist advertising isn't good, it's very good to know where we've been. Like if we don't know where we've been, there's no way we can know where we are truly. And if we don't know where we are, it's very difficult to chart a path forward to a future that we'd like to see or experience. So I wanted to share that with the group too.
So I imagine, and you've talked about archives already before, but I know they must have played a huge role in your research. Were there any specific collections or oral histories that stood out to you that were essential to, bring those stories to life?
Yes, and would you please go to page 85? So quite a few. One, I am very fortunate that the University of Georgia Press chose to publish this book in partnership with Georgia Humanities. Incredible partners, incredible press. It's all about Georgia history. And the number one resource, which I think about as an archive, an online archive, that was actually created through Georgia Humanities and others, is the New Georgia Encyclopedia. That is an exceptional resource of history. As far as like a true archive in the form of a building, at least, the Auburn Avenue Research Library is the country's largest repository of Black history. There's not a single book in there. Well, that's not true. There's some, but not part of the archives. They're oral histories, although the one from when I was 7 is not in there. There's remember microfiche. There's so much in there. And so to have this literally next door to Constellations, which you mentioned earlier on Auburn Avenue, to be able to have access to the knowledge and sharing of it from the new Georgia Encyclopedia, I mean, those were very, very helpful. Almost all of the research that I did for this book was secondary research through reading or otherwise viewing information. Although when I did host Sidewalk Radio, which was a radio show on AM 1690 Voice of the Arts that explored history and culture and preservation and life in the modern city, I did have the chance to interview 180 different people over 5 years. And some of those people made real history in Sweet Auburn. At the time of doing that show, though, which started in 2010, I had not, I didn't realized that I was thinking about writing a book.
Snuck up on you.
Yeah, it snuck up on me. But one of the people who I was able to interview, actually a few of the people I was able to interview do make some cameo appearances in the book. So that was another great way of getting some information in a primary fashion.
Excellent. Yeah, kind of sowing the seeds for that book. So out of sheer curiosity, how much time do you think you've spent doing research? Can you quantify that?
Yes, 8 years plus the rest of my life. I'm 51.
Nonstop, no sleep.
I mean, it did take me 8 years to write this book. But, it's a lot easier to understand what we're doing with hindsight. And I wasn't ready to start writing the book until like midway through the 5th year. As one reason to note, I had not yet worked on Auburn Avenue for 7 years every single day. I had not gone to graduate school. I went to Georgia Tech and got a master's in digital media when I was 40 years old, which was great. It was like jumping into an alternate universe. And I didn't have the pressure that a lot of students have. We've talked about this. I didn't have the pressure of finding a job. I had the pressure of having a job. But there I learned how to research. I mean, you really get, you have to get good at research very quickly over there. And then I just lived more, got married, had a child, start to think more about the future. And then I was ready to write it and had a lot of help.
So many people or places and moments are tied to Sweet Auburn. So how did you decide on the structure of your book, which is kind of like streets or areas, right? And then you focus on specific buildings and the stories that speak to those buildings. So what kind of guided your storytelling approach and the structure of the book?
Well, one was that realization about hidden history. And the other is directly tied to a woman named Dr. Jacqueline Jones Royster. Jackie was the dean of the Ivan Allen College of Liberal Arts at Georgia Tech when I was there. I did a presentation called History of the World, which was about the Daily World building that we talked about earlier, and then my personal history with it and leading a historic preservation effort. And I knew who the dean of the college was, but I didn't know that the dean knew who I was. And after that grand reopening that I mentioned, I got probably the nicest letter I've ever received in the mail. And I loved that it actually came in the mail. And I opened this and it said, "Dear Jean, this is from Jacqueline Jones Royster, the dean of the Ivan Allen College, and Jackie, the little girl who spent her summers on Auburn Avenue and at the Daily World building. And for both of us, I want to say thank you." I was like, of course, blown away. Making a long story short, for about 2.5 years, I tried to convince Dr. Royster to become the cultural editor of the book. Because when you're writing about anything, like it's critically important to have perspectives that are essential to getting a more full story, right? And Dr. Royster has not only the perspectives to lend. For one, I'm not a woman. I'm not Black. I wasn't born in a segregated South. I didn't spend my childhood in Sweet Auburn. I'm not a scholar of rhetoric. I'm not a linguist. I've never been the dean of a college, and on and on and on. And back to the hindsight, it wasn't, I discovered it wasn't that like after 2.5 years, I finally succeeded in convincing Jackie to be the cultural editor. Jackie is mentoring me from the letter on. And I think she finally like was convinced that I was ready, basically. And then she like pretended like it was my idea. But that was very, very helpful.
Great mentorship.
And if you all read this book, and I hope you do, start with the afterword. Because that's what Jackie wrote. And it's incredible. But if it's okay with you, maybe I can read just a touch from the introduction.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had talked about, where we've been, where we are now, where we're going. The introduction is titled The Mission of the Guide. In 1854, less than a decade before the onset of the American Civil War, a free Black woman named Laura Lavinia Kelly Combs purchased a small lot at the intersection of Whitehall Street, now Peachtree, and Wheat Street, now Auburn Avenue. With this visionary acquisition, Combs became the first Black person to own property in Sweet Auburn, a district later recognized as the primary nexus of Black culture and commerce in the United States, despite extreme challenges in the face of institutionalized segregation. In a move foreshadowing the neighborhood's ethos of empowerment, Combs soon directed her investment toward a profound and deeply personal mission, exchanging that land for something of far greater value, her husband's freedom from slavery.
It's hard to jump from that to my next question. But I do want to talk about the illustrations in the book. I think they're beautiful. They almost kind of feel animated to me, in like they feel like there's movement in them, which I absolutely love. So how did you end up collaborating with Clay? Is it Kingingham? Kingingham. And what role did the visuals play in enhancing that narrative?
Thank you for asking that question on so many levels. Would you mind going to page 66?
Yes.
All right. So, and maybe zoom out just a touch. Yeah, that's perfect. So I mentioned that I was over at Georgia Tech. I needed a break one day from like reading or whatever it was I was doing. So of course I was like, playing around on the internet, and I was on Instagram, and in the feed popped up these incredible illustrations from this person named Clay Kinningham. And I was like, these are really, really good. And some of them are in Atlanta. And so I had sent him a direct message and said, where are you? Where do you live? Atlanta. I live in Atlanta. What are you up to? I'm a student at Georgia Tech. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm a student over there. Where are you right now? Like, I'm at Starbucks on the corner of Fifth. I'm like, I'll be right over. So we sat down for a coffee. I had already started working on civil sites, but I didn't have a clear enough direction. And this coffee visit ended up helping to solidify, clarify quite a few things, not to mention start an incredible friendship. And I asked Clay right then and there, will you be the illustrator of a book? And he said yes, not realizing it would take 8 years for me to deliver. But the other night at the Auburn Avenue Research Library, actually on February 12th, I was sitting with Clay at a table signing books. And it was just fun to like be there. His work is exceptional. That energy or movement you feel, it's not meant, it's meant to be artistic. It's also meant to show the beauty and the flaws. Right? I mean, like the YMCA, the Butler Street YMCA is one of the most historically significant buildings in this country. It was known as Black City Hall. It is falling apart. Clay's illustration here shows that it has some majesty. It shows that it's got some importance, but it also shows plywood covering a door and, windows that some are missing, some are open, some are closed. To chronicle like that moment in time is really important, I think, especially for something that's about history. We want to understand it. It has to be matter of fact. Like earlier today, Robin brought my friend Jamie Allen, who's right there, like Jamie, into see the maps and an incredible map of Appleton County that is a surveyor's map, hand drawn, and then labeling all the trees. Okay, later, I don't know how many years later, hundreds?
Yeah.
Hundreds of years later, to be able to replant trees, I guess, native to that specific spot. We were able to look back at the map, know the trees, and put them there. That takes documenting something very specific. What Clay has been able to do through his illustrations is document Sweet Auburn at the onset of 2024, which is really when I finished writing and Clay pretty much put down his pencils. And the thing that is, I think, important about that is that no matter what happens into the future, not just next year or next decade, but 50 or 100 or however many years in the future, people will be able to see the beauty and the flaws of Sweet Auburn and better understand it. I cannot express enough how important his work is to bringing life and light to these pages.
Yeah, that's what I say. That's what it feels like. It just kind of makes it feel like it's come alive. So beyond capturing the past, your book also explores some of the challenges that are facing Sweet Auburn. So in the description of your book, the neighborhood is referenced as the wealthiest Black neighborhood in the world, but it's also faced really significant challenges over the years. So what do you see as the biggest hurdles that the district faces today, and how can they be addressed?
Yes, would you please go to page 94? So this is Heron's, which was the first restaurant in Atlanta to desegregate. Today it's got a contemporary program of theater. I wanted to bring this up specifically because this is a happy story. This is an example of success. But the challenges are vast. It's interesting to note that in 1956, Sweet Auburn was named by Fortune magazine the wealthiest Negro street in the world because Sweet Auburn was this nexus of Black culture and commerce. At the passing of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, Sweet Auburn began a slow, which became then much more steady decline. People had other choices. At this time, pre the passing of the Civil Rights Act, segregation was law. Discrimination was law. I mean, that's devastating. And then with the passing of the Civil Rights Act, people could move into different parts of town that they may have wanted to be in, go to different churches, start businesses, seek new opportunities. And that started to lead to disinvestment. And then really one of the most devastating blows was when the interstate basically tore the neighborhood in two and fractured critical layouts and fabric of a community. And so you mix that in with fear, specifically white fear over being around Black people and not wanting to come into downtown. And this isn't like exclusive to Atlanta. This is many, many big cities around the South. And the white flight that followed, then you get a neighborhood that can lose almost half of its historic structures in not a whole lot of time. Now, this building, Heron's, was the first restaurant to have Black customers. Dr. Lee and Dolores Shelton and her mother. Because they voluntarily integrated, Ed Negri was the owner. They saw a severe backlash. And in 1963 alone, Heron's as a restaurant lost $50,000. That's equivalent to $400,000 today. They did not last as a business. The building basically went into decline. It was vacant until some very philanthropic people who care about preservation and history, named Bill and Peg Balzer, bought the building. It's an 18,000 square foot building, roughly. They bought this building for $1.2 million and gave it to Theatrical Outfit, and then helped lead a capital campaign in the name of the historic preservation to the tune of like $5 million. That now you can go see a play in, and where the Sheltons became season ticket holders. This is a great success story, but it's hard. And you need to, have the interest, the ability, the trust, and the circumstance for all that to come together. But like I mentioned earlier, if we're connected to stories, we can be motivated to act. And so that's one of the things that I'm hoping for with Civil Sites, is that more people get connected to this vibrant history and historic district and can do something. And it's not necessarily go down and rehabilitate a building. Today, we're all contributing by being here talking about it at the Georgia Archives. So thank you.
So it kind of leads me into, is there anything else that individuals and communities can do to help preserve that legacy of Sweet Auburn?
So, when you all of a sudden realize, or you learn something and then you realize you've known it for like years or decades or your whole life type of thing. It's like a year and a half ago, a friend just kind of out of nowhere over coffee goes, "Do you know why companies change?" And I was like, no. And he said, because their customers want them to. We're the customers, right? And the company may be a district or a city or a state or a country. The way that we, basically purchase something or sway the company in change is by voting. And so it doesn't have to be a literal vote. It can just be some other form of demonstration to share what's important to you. And it's really that simple.
I think that speaks to a lot more than just Sweet Auburn. That speaks to basically almost any aspect of our lives now. So
yeah, and I want to add to that, like, I'm a historic preservationist. Preservation, though, is pervasive. Another memory from being a kid growing up in New Orleans is we lived close to Audubon Park, which is a beautiful nature preserve. And I saw a puddle with a frog in it. I don't even know how old I was, but the puddle had oil in it. And I knew that that was wrong. And I couldn't tell you, anything about why it was wrong, but I knew it wasn't healthy. I knew it wasn't right. That was like this inkling of environmental preservation, preservation of health, happiness. And there's so many forms of preservation. That's just another one where we can, help the company change.
Yeah, I love that. So, you've mentioned a few of the influential figures that have called Sweet Auburn home. Were there any personal stories or voices that really stuck with you as you wrote this book?
I mean, so many, and sometimes it changes upon like where we are in our lives, which stories, matter or become relevant or more relevant. Like I can tell you that the tornado of 2008 here was a lot more relevant after seeing the devastation of Hurricane Katrina in my hometown, seeing my hometown destroyed and seeing displacement on par with World War II Europe. I was paying a lot more attention to natural disasters as a cause of destruction for history, and spaces and places which really only frankly matter if people are there providing relevance to it. And then in turn, we get informed on, our own identity. I think like John Wesley Dobbs, though, who is known as the unofficial mayor of Sweet Auburn, incredibly significant, incredibly instrumental. You mentioned Georgia Day, February 12th. We're gonna have to change our trivia question.
But no, you've said it a few times.
But on February 12th, John Wesley Dobbs also made history by forming the Atlanta Civic and Political League at Big Bethel Church, where he was instrumental in helping Blacks register to vote. And over the next 10 years, along with A.T. Walden, was able to register 20,000 Black people to vote, which represented 25% of the Atlanta electorate. That requires politicians, and in this case, white politicians, to pay attention and to know that they may not get reelected, also known as losing their job. And that started to change things. He also was the Grand Master of the Prince Hall Masons. This organization was incredibly vital as a place of leadership in building up Sweet Auburn. And he and his wife, Ophelia, also had 6 daughters. Dobbs believed in the power of bucks, ballots, and books as the true path to emancipation for Blacks. So they poured themselves and their educational fervor into their daughters, all of whom became quite accomplished, all of whom graduated from Spelman. Mattawilda Dobbs toured internationally as a principal singer. Irene Dobbs Jackson became Atlanta's first Black person to hold a library card, and her son Maynard Jackson, John Wesley Dobbs' grandson, became Atlanta's first Black mayor. Dobbs was critically important, and I loved learning about him and how he led through care and really conservation, protection, care, which just so happens to be the definition of preservation.
I think the last few questions I have all kind of revolve around the same idea of, is there a call to action? Is there something that we can do specifically to help, Sweet Auburn, but also, neighborhoods just like it?
Yeah, so Dr. Royster and I wrote an opinion editorial for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution not too long ago. Basically, answering this question that hadn't been asked yet. Thank you for asking it. And with this idea on the 60th anniversary of the passing of the Civil Rights Act, to figure out ways to get involved. And doing the type of historic preservation that I do, depending on so many factors, can be extremely difficult, if not impossible. So like, we've all been around, we've all seen over the past like 4 or 5 years how high inflation was. I mean, that was everything from the grocery store, right, to the gas pump, to construction, which is pretty important when you're helping to rebuild a building. Interest rates, ridiculously high, although not as high as they were in the 80s in New Orleans. I saw that happen as a kid as well. I guess there's also been a lack of debt financing from banks. Like, how do you do historic preservation when you can't do historic preservation? Well, it's interesting because the answer is pretty simple. Follow your own passion pursuit. And because Dean Royster was the dean of the Ivan Allen College, you know, the humanities, because I'm a writer, because I love history, the opinion editorial focuses on getting involved through the liberal arts, the fine arts, and design. Like, you can write a poem, you can write a letter, you can come to programming, you can go on a walk with your children or grandchildren or friends and talk about history and then bring it home or bring it, you know, to a social gathering. If you know someone who is a designer, this could be through graphic design, this could be through technology, this could be through architecture. The list really goes on and on. And so the barrier to get involved with preservation is only limited to your own personal passion. So whatever anyone here is interested in, it can be part of preservation because preservation is part of everything if it's going to continue into the future.
Excellent. So we're running short on time, so I do want to kind of skip ahead. So what's the best way for someone to purchase your book?
Thank you.
Yes.
So I mentioned that the book's published by University of Georgia Press. If you all like to go to a local independent bookstore, that's where I would love to send everyone, you know, support local, support community. If it's easier to go online, University of Georgia Press. And then of course there's some very big retailers out there on the internet you can go to. So yeah, if you like it, please pick up a copy for yourself or to share with family and friends.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you have a question?
Do you have available here?
We don't have any today here. No.
Oh, I would love to have them sign.
No. Sorry.
Well, we are going to be having events. And there's a website, which is civilsites.com. So civilsites.com. Some events will include booksellers, which in hindsight, I guess hindsight's become a theme today. I should have brought a bookseller here with me. I apologize. But if you give me your address or anyone else who wants to, or give them to Robin, she can email me. I will happily sign a book for you and send it to you. I will.
Beautiful.
Don't forget to tell me who I'm signing it to. What's your name?
I love this history.
You do.
I live this history myself. Oh, yes.
He's
It's
asking your
wonderful
name. He's
that
asking
you're
your name.
interested.
Your name.
What's your name?
Yeah, I will.
He doesn't listen.
We'll get you.
So, thank you.
Yeah.
And visit Sweet Auburn. You know, I'd pick a warmer day.
Yes. Yeah. They have tours, they have foot tours and food tours and all kinds of other stuff that you can do to kind of help support that too. So highly recommend.
Wonderful.
Jean also brought a couple of bags to give away. So we're going to do a little bit of a trivia round real quick.
Yeah.
And then we'll see if anybody has any questions. Actually, let's do questions first and then we can do the trivia after.
Okay, sounds good.
Does
And
anybody,
I'll ask one trivia question. You ask one?
Yeah.
Okay.
does anybody have any questions?
Boundary, how far west, how far east does this neighborhood go?
Yeah, it's a good question. And there are a lot of maps in this book. This is part of or it's located within the old Fourth Ward of Atlanta, Fourth Ward. And it's but specifically Sweet Auburn, to make it easier. If you start at Peachtree Street, shocker, and on Auburn Avenue, and you go east down Auburn Avenue, and you run into the Belt Line, in Fourth Ward and Inman Park, really, like in that kind of center line. That will be like a linear boundary. And then it goes a few blocks in both directions from there.
So go up as far as Poncevillia?
North and south, to North Avenue. But that's for the Fourth Ward. Sweet Auburn, a number of blocks in each direction along that linear east-west.
Any other questions?
You all look like you enjoyed lunch. You want to know a fun place to go for lunch down there?
Yeah.
Yes. Good food recommendations.
Yes. You want to tell them? Yes.
Is it
Sweet Auburn Curb Market.
CURB? Curb?
Yes.
Okay.
The best food
And such variety and fun.
and fun.
Yeah.